Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we're going to talk about how digitally savvy directors are impacting corporate strategy. And joining me is Caroline Tsay, who's the board member with Rosetta Stone and Travelzoo. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you, TK. It's great to be here.
So every study that I've been associated with over my years about board members and boards have said that they want to spend more time on strategy. You have experience, even at your young age, you have experience of being chair of strategy committees. Talk a little bit about what their charge is and how you guys sort of attack strategy.
The committee is charged with reviewing and evaluating the company's business strategies and making any recommendations to the rest of the board on potential strategy changes. It's also focused on reviewing and evaluating growth opportunities for the company, anything from marketing, sales, to operational strategies, and the use of technology as far as influencing and expanding the company's growth prospects. You'll see that some boards set up technology committees, strategy committees, innovation committees, e-commerce committees. These are all committees that are set up to help the full board spend even more time talking about a subset of those topics related to direction and long-term goals. And ultimately, they're all there to increase shareholder value. And I really think that a board should spend a measurable amount of time on this area, and to set aside even more time to even involve the management team where they might not otherwise have exposure, or don't get more than an hour or two in a board meeting once every several months or so. This is a great way to be able to dedicate focus and attention.
Well, it's certainly true that boards are always challenged to get through all the regulatory stuff in a board meeting, and often they don't find time to do this, and in some cases either aren't disciplined enough to make that time, which is pretty important, or they solve it by taking a retreat or something. So the idea of creating a committee on something that's so important certainly makes sense. Now, what's particularly interesting about you is your background. It's all digitally oriented, and you represent, if you will, the board member of the future, knowing where business is going and what's happening. So how do you use that skill set specifically in what you're doing on the competitive nature, and how are people like you impacting strategy?
Yeah. Well, as board members or as a committee, we're there to challenge assumptions and to ask probing questions. We're also there to provide relevant expertise and advise on any matters that help the company in achieving its long-term goals. Some of the issues and topics that we as digital natives can cover include anything from hiring talent and a new breed of setting up organizations and people to help with digital transformations. It may even be around different customer segments, their use of web, mobile, many other devices and technologies, and how that supports a product strategy, to providing advice around using big data to drive decisions related to marketing strategy or even sales strategy, and how do you make that more efficient for a company. So there's several of the different topics where we can spend more time with the management team and the rest of the board, leverage our involvement to be able to help the company move forward.
You know, I had said every company is unique in the way that they sort of try and deal with this. What's your experience? How have your boards or other boards that you know, how have they handled squeezing strategy and sort of retreat versus meeting or whatever? Share with us what your experiences have been.
Sure. In my experience, we spend quite a bit of time in every normal board meeting on strategy and in the committees that we're a part of. So I'm not personally experienced with any separate board retreats or offsites. And I think markets are constantly changing. They're not static. So it's got to be an ongoing topic of discussion in board meetings throughout the year or through separate committees that are set up. But those are some ways in which I think that you need to kind of move forward to be able to get the full board's involvement. Sometimes the committees that we've set them up so that they meet once or twice in between board meetings, and we can spend any number of hours, from 1 to several hours, on the topic.
So have you ever thought about the challenge of a young, digitally savvy person like yourself going into a older sort of company and board structure where you're trying to change the thought process so greatly on what kind of challenge that would be?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be there if the other board members weren't open, right, to some kind
True.
of change and transition, and I think are aware of what's happening in the market with their customers, whether they're enterprise or consumer-based customers. Business models are changing, the environment's changing quite a bit, and the use of technology in support of that or to enable all of that is changing. And so I think there is recognition now on boards of needing someone with that background or experience who's seen transitions over time. Even in the technology world, you'll see that consumer internet companies are somewhat farther ahead in terms of innovation, product development, and testing and learning and feeding that back into their marketing and sales strategies as maybe some other technology companies. So even in the tech world, there are transitions happening across those types of companies.
Do you think that the small caps, that the boards of the small caps are much more involved in sort of the strategy development? Because you always hear, you know, noses in, fingers out for directors. Yet it sounds like your boards are more active in participating with management in the process versus, you know, if you were to go to a Fortune 100 or whatever, I'm sure the board members are more sounding boards than they are participatory. You think that's probably true?
I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I do have to be careful, right, that we as board members are not stepping into the management team's role, right, or an operational role. There is somewhat of a fine line, but again, the participation that we can bring as board members is to ask questions and to advise where we've gone through experiences, so that that's helpful for the company in achieving its goals.
Yeah. So what advice would you give all our viewers out there, and maybe corporate secretaries as well, on how the board can improve its role of participating in strategic planning?
Well, one key piece of advice I'd give is that as a board, you should really understand what's going on with your customers and your clients. I think one great way to measure that is through NPS, Net Promoter Scores. It's one metric by which an organization is defined as to how it's stacking up and how its customers are perceiving its services, products, and content. I think that's an invaluable input into any strategic planning exercise. I also think that a company should really understand how it's doing relative to the market. And one way to be able to go get research and understand that is to potentially commission a third-party research firm to be able to do that. And of course, you would have the management team take the lead on some of that. But I think those are kind of key drivers and inputs into any strategic planning exercise.
Well, Caroline, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. You truly represent the board member of the future that's serving today, but that's certainly going to be much more representative on boards as we go forward. So I hope that there's people that are taking notice of all that you can contribute to a board today, because that would make diversity of thought, and particularly in the digital or cyber risks, is becoming increasingly important. So thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical issue that will help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.